Hello everyone, it's me Scientia Graphicos. Today I am going to analyze the Ukrainian counteroffensive against the Russian army and its hidden success in the waters of the Black Sea. Before starting the counteroffensive, expectations among Ukrainians were high. There was a fervent determination to counter threats and recover territories, which generated an intense period of preparation. The preparations were meticulous. Ukraine amassed considerable military equipment and trained multiple divisions for this strategic offensive. Specialized units and advanced tactics were deployed with effort. Ukraine is estimated to have amassed a significant arsenal, including modern equipment and advanced weaponry to address the challenges posed by the counteroffensive. However, despite the preparations, there were obvious shortcomings. Some military equipment necessary for the execution of the counteroffensive had not yet been received, which represented a challenge for the planned operations. On the contrary, before the counteroffensive, the Russian army established strong fortresses and strategic defensive lines to secure its key positions. These defenses were designed to resist and protect strategic terrain of military importance. Although the exact number of soldiers that Russia has within the Ukrainian theater of operations is not known, the determination of the Moscow government to reverse previous losses in confrontations against Ukraine led Vladimir Putin to carry out levies to increase the number of soldiers deployed significantly. Faced with the question of whether to continue preparing and wait for the arrival of more Western equipment or attack before the Russians become more fortified, the decision was made to attack on June 4, 2023. During the first days of the operation, the Ukrainian army planned a serious attempt to breach it with a mechanized attack with the village of Robotyne as its main axis and the city of Bakhmut and the Velika-Novosilka salient as secondary axes. However, this attack would suffer heavy losses, which would force the Ukrainian High Command to pause the attack and rethink its strategy. As in any operation of this magnitude, the Ukrainian army made built-in assumptions. In this case, there were probably some initial assumptions about the degree to which the Russian defense was prepared and to what extent the Russian army was motivated enough to hold these lines. Also taking into account the performance of the new brigades considering their level of training, familiarity with the equipment, and the amount of support equipment available, so the initial attack was not successful. The Ukrainian army made adjustments, then changed to tactics that they mainly involved taking a traditional approach. Therefore, the Ukrainian army carried out an assault that combined dismounted infantry tactics, essentially fighting from position to position, slowly putting pressure on the Russian forces as they attempted to establish an advantage in artillery fire and exploit their advantage in pressure attack systems. Long range in many areas they were effective, but this essentially meant that it was going to be a campaign of attrition. The Russian army reacted with a counteroffensive, counterattacking and deploying much of its force. Much of the initial fighting took place on the line of initial Russian defenses, ahead of the main defensive belts. Throughout the counteroffensive, we could see how both sides effectively used their reserves. The Russian army launched airborne units and units from the deeper force groups to cover gaps, relieving the heavy pressure on elements of the 15th Army. For their part, the Ukrainian forces used their reserves, the 46th and 82nd Airmobile Brigades basically entering to follow the second echelon forces. And this is where we see the failure of the counteroffensive in the land corridor, since entering into this combat dynamic meant a question of who has more resistance, Ukraine to attack or Russia to defend. The result of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, in essence, was that the attacks carried out by the Ukrainians only served to slowly push back the Russian forces from advanced lines to better prepared lines constantly and in the same direction. In cases where they could faced with cornering, they simply retreat. Once the Ukrainians captured certain areas, it was clear that the Russians were going to retreat to the next line. So the Russians were not too reckless. During the counteroffensive, they launched a counterattack here and there, but then they abandoned the position, trying to avoid cornering. The Russians built a defense, but it is clear that they chose not to necessarily structure the defense this way, given how they viewed the Ukrainian offensive advance. Now, if we talk about what happened in the waters of the Black Sea, the development of the Ukrainian counteroffensive was more benign. During the counteroffensive, the Institute for the Study of War ISWAL reported the successful attack on the 744th Communications Center of the Black Sea Fleet Command by Ukrainian forces. In an exclusive interview with the Ukrainian service of Voice of America, published this Saturday, September 23rd, the head of Ukrainian Defense Intelligence, Kirilo Budanov, stated that senior Russian commanders were seriously injured. Among the wounded is the group's commander, Colonel General Alexander Romanchuk, who is in very serious condition. The chief of the General Staff, Lieutenant General Olesikov, is unconscious, declared Kirilo Budanov. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed that a soldier was missing after the attack, although it initially said that he had died. Another success story in the waters of the Black Sea, reported by the France 24 news agency, was the attack with maritime drones on the naval base of the Black Sea Fleet in the Russian city of Novorossiysk, resulting in one ship being damaged or destroyed. These success stories, despite going unnoticed, have relieved and even broken at times the maritime blockade that Russia has imposed on Ukraine since the beginning of the war. Let us not forget that these successes came at a time when Russia refused to renew the grain agreement that allowed Ukraine to export part of its grain production by sea. In a war of survival like the one the Ukrainian state faces today, not everything has to be black and white. There will be stories of failure, but also of success. Let us not forget that despite the failure of this counteroffensive, there were 2 cases of previous counteroffensives with success for the defending side. From me, that's all for today. Don't forget to like and follow me on my social networks so we can continue growing as a community. Bye!